Before I introduce Richard Smith, just a couple of items. There's a number of handouts over there that you can pick up. The one in yellow, make sure you get both parts. There's actually 3 pages. One of them's print front to back, and the third page. It's a piece that Richard's spouse put out, and Richard can comment more about that. Once Friends of Headwaters and MCEA, the Minnesota Center for Environmental Advocacy, actually won the case at the Court of Appeals to have the environmental assessment, or I'm sorry, the environmental impact statement done. Many people have confused that to assume that now the pipelines are heading north or somewhere else. This is actually a break in the process to spend the next 9 months or a year, whatever it is, completing this exercise. And it only means that one has to be more diligent, be on target, and not have patience, but rather be very focused and be at the table when these conversations are occurring. Part of that is a piece where she describes some actions and some things that individuals and lake associations and local units of government, et cetera, in this area could very well participate in. And I would encourage you to pick that up. The one in green is a piece that covers some of the items I had addressed about some of the economic impacts and things of that sort in the immediate area. Friends of Headwaters is a 501c3 organization. Here comes the pitch. A number of us support Friends of Headwaters, and a number of us support the Minnesota Center for Environmental Advocacy. Our organization will be continuing to make that commitment, and we're working with some of our members and things like that to actually figure out what those resources are going to look like over the next few months. But the fact of the matter is they're going to need money to do that. MCEA, if you're not familiar with that, is a 501c3 organization also, who are primarily attorneys that work on matters involving a lot of public policy things. So consequently, what I'm going to encourage you to do is if you're interested in supporting this, well, WAPOA, when we do our annual notice, people can submit to their, pay their dues and those kinds of things and do a checkoff to other interests. Or in your own individual lake associations or otherwise, I would encourage you through your respective lake associations to contemplate seriously a contribution to Friends of Headwaters, both during the year and at year end. We're going to try to work with some of our members in terms of tax planning as year end matters come along, and do some work in that regard. If you happen to be a WAPOA member and want to support this, you can send us a check, or you can go online. Just in the box it says memo, put FOH or MCEA, whichever. It will go for this particular activity. The other question that's come up is, what can individuals do? What can people do about these kinds of matters? There's several things you can do. First of all, probably getting mad isn't the right thing, but calling to action is the right thing. And I can think of a couple, 3 resources to do that. Minnesota Coalition of Lake Associations is an organization some of us worked to create about 3 or 4 years ago. Took a couple of years to get running, and finally it's running, representing about 16 or so lake associations, largely through central Minnesota, Stearns County, in that area, on up to including Lake and Cook County up on the North Shore, Beltrami County, Hubbard, and then certainly over in the Detroit Lakes area, Becker County, et cetera. We're a small organization, budgets I think about, I don't know, $5,000 a year or something like that. But your lake associations or your county organizations are participants and members in that organization and are working very hard in that regard. Second thing is your individual lake association can be a player in all that. What I've learned over the last 2 or 3 years that I mentioned earlier is I think the case is now starting to be built, that people are listening, they're starting to care, and they're starting to realize this is in my backyard, this is me. I don't have to wait for that big piece of earth-moving equipment to come across my back door. In fact, I don't know if the orange stakes are out there yet, but suffice to say, guys like Richard can show you where the pipes will be, or the stakes will be, if we're not careful. And so our organization is going to continue to do that. What we're looking for, obviously, are individuals that will help us arrange these kinds of forums, attend things. We need to continue to write articles. We need to continue to publish the information. We need to still speak about what's important to us in this particular area. WAPOA is always looking for people that can help us with communication, both to our members, which is 1,000, 1,100 people, parties, businesses, as well in the media and the communication in the larger area. It does get published. And what I discovered is, I got into the Brainerd paper this last year, I got into the Minneapolis Tribune last year. My buddy here, I reviewed my article with him and said, would you rather send it from Friends of Headwaters? And he said, you know, I think they're tired of hearing about Richard Smith, so why don't you write it? And the truth is, it worked. I don't know what'll happen the second time. So there is a case for more voices being heard, more organizations being heard. We at WAPOA will work with you to coordinate some of those communications if that's certainly of interest to you. So we can use time, we can use some writing, we can use some money, and continue to fight this battle. One of the things I was hoping Jeff would say, which is on his blog, and that was, I believe it was one of the townships or the counties that simply discovered that the replacement line actually went away from their original plan. And the remark was, those guys were organized better than we were, and Enbridge decided to take the path of least resistance. Wouldn't that be great? I don't know where the path of least resistance is, but I hope it's not here, okay? And so it's going to take more voices to do those kinds of things and all that. The last comment I'm going to make, it's really hard to say this one because we've got some people that have turned this into political and politics. Pipelines have, in my opinion, become too much registered in favor of if you're a member of one party and opposed if you're a member of another party. I didn't know pipelines were Republicans or Democrats, but it's pretty clear they are. So I will let you know for today, I invited every state official representing this area. State senators from Grand Rapids, Itasca County, all the way through here into Crow Wing, Aiken, etc. We happen to have one party in the majority at the moment. All of them were too busy to come. This is summer. The representative of I wrote to Representative Nolan. I didn't hear a response. I did send a note to his opposition, Mr. Mills. I haven't heard a response there either. So we did invite them. But I can tell you that with respect to two local officials who have spoken to me directly about this, think we have lost sight of the value of pipelines through this area in terms of property tax revenue to their counties and jobs. Well, property tax revenue is probably true. In other words, a pipeline through a piece of wooded land will have a little larger tax bill than that piece of wooded land. Okay, that's true. Question becomes, in that case, what's it going to look like if they were to have a breach in that line or otherwise? And number two, as Jeff indicated, when they have temporary construction permits, I can pretty much assure you there is no tax being generated on that next 60 or 70 feet. It's only going to be on the easement, okay? Whether they're there for 2 years or otherwise. But in terms of jobs, that is a complete and total joke. When I first talked to Jeff, I actually went out and looked at some other stories to see if I could collaborate that piece, and he's true. And the piece that's a joke, and Enbridge doesn't like it because I confronted him about it, they went to UMD and commissioned this fiscal study. If you're interested in it, I have it, which talks about the $2 billion revenue, but it also talks about the jobs. If you read the footnotes, where did they get their data? The jobs data says came from Enbridge, Calgary, Alberta. That 50% of the jobs will be local people. Well, guess what? You know, I'm going to be 7 feet tall, play basketball soon. I mean, you can be whatever you want when you do these things, apparently. So I asked Enbridge, I said, why would you do that piece of research and then tell them what the variables are and have them publish it with their name? That's dishonest. I'm a college professor. I would probably wonder about those graduate students writing that particular piece and what you're learning in an academic setting. Is that called, what, dishonesty? Probably not plagiarism yet. But that's a problem. So takeaways, we can use time, we can use some effort in communications and writing these pieces, conducting more of these forums, talking to your neighbors. Remember, there's about 2,700 property owners around this chain of lakes. What do we got? 3% of them here. So there's a lot of them are in disbelief about these kinds of things. We can use some money to help make contributions to Friends of Headwaters and MCA to support that. We're probably looking for at least this initial round over the next year or so. Mr. Smith has indicated, and they do not get compensated, incidentally. He does this as part of a passion. It's become quite a passion.
Yeah, can I talk about it soon?
You can. And we're going to need to make a financial commitment to that particular effort, so you can help with that. Now,
Thank you.
Mr. Smith, Richard Smith, President of Friends of Headwaters. He's going to give us an update on where this whole matter is and how we're going to torpedo it.
College professors. My mic on? Thanks, Tom.
There you are. There you are.
I want all of you to put your hands together like that. Now imagine you're at your favorite lake or your favorite stream, your favorite spring, and you're dipping your hands into what you love about being here. You know, yesterday I went into the water at Blue Lake where I live in Hubbard County, and I took that handful of water and I splashed it on my face, and I love doing that. That's my water, it's your water, it's our headwaters. That's why I took my hands and took a picture of my friend's kids crossing the headwaters at the Mississippi, because nothing is more valuable to us in Minnesota than water. You know, our slogan at Friends of the Headwaters is, a barrel of water is worth more than a barrel of oil. Now, imagine this in your hands. This is tar sands oil, right here. This is what it looks like when it comes out of the ground in northern Alberta. Jeff talked about what happened on the Kalamazoo River. This right here is what can jeopardize our headwaters country, Minnesota's waters, more than anything else right now, with perhaps the exception of the sulfide mine proposed on the edge of the boundary waters. To get this to go through a pipe, now this would be like you holding a big handful of sticky peanut butter. It has really high adhesive quality to it, so they have to dilute it to push it through a pipe. What happened, like what Jeff talked about, is when this pipe ruptured in Kalamazoo, and this is the rupture in the pipe in line 6B. The oils, the ingredients, the diluents they call them, that they mixed with this tar sands evaporated, and this stuff the tar sands went to the bottom of the river. He told you the whole story. 6 years later, and yesterday was the anniversary, they didn't completely clean it up. It's still in the river. Basically, the EPA said, we just can't do this anymore because over time, sediments had covered this tar sands deposits on the bottom of the river. When they dug it up, it was re-releasing toxins. That's what's in our hands, in our water here. The National Academy of Sciences did a study after the Kalamazoo spill. Jeff had mentioned it. This is a completely new kind of crude oil material that they're moving through pipelines. It's the first time. They don't know how to deal with it when there's an accident. Now this is about 125 pages right here, and I'll cut to the chase and tell you there's two primary findings out of this. Tar sands oil should never be in a water-rich environment because it can never be completely cleaned up. And the second finding is our regulatory agencies and our first responders don't know how to deal with this yet. The Coast Guard is extremely alarmed about it. I left, over on the table there are some key takeaways that I summarized as best I could out of these 125 pages. You know, government speak, so you know how it is. Minnesota, in our headwaters country here, has got a target on its back. And especially now that Enbridge and the Department of Justice and EPA have arrived at this settlement regarding the Kalamazoo spill, where Enbridge very conveniently dropped in the Line 3 replacement project into this. The combination of Line 3, which will push about 770,000 barrels of oil per day, and Sandpiper will move nearly 50 million gallons of oil per day through our lake country. Tom showed you some maps. The red line there is the proposed route by the company. This map here is generated from a satellite photo indicating where the clearest waters are in the state. The dark blue are the clearest waters. Look where they want to put the pipeline route. I'm never very good with these pointers, but here we are right there. What's that mean? Obviously, Tom covered all the numbers about tourism. Tom just made a remark about how local officials really want the property tax dollars off of the pipeline. For the all the counties involved from west side to the east side of the state for Sandpiper, that's $25 million a year. Just in taxes generated to the state of Minnesota from fishing alone, $342 million annually. Fishing, hunting, and wildlife watching is $4.3 billion in annual retail sales for the state. That's something that's at risk. I call this map our $2 billion map. Now this is the primary watershed over in my county, Hubbard County, that can be affected by any kind of spill on the pipeline corridor there. In yellow outlined are the property values. There are $2 billion in property values that are at risk to the county. So what's that mean for us over here? You can see the red. Tom showed you the map. From what I understand, the property values in the Whitefish chain are probably the highest property values for lakeshore in the state. Your groundwater flow here is generally from the northeast towards the southwest towards the chain. I want to just, where the pipeline corridor is the company has told us that we're not going to destroy any new land to put the pipeline in. We're going to put it in an existing utility corridor. That existing utility corridor is a high voltage transmission line corridor. The pathway's already been cleared through our northern forest. What they're not telling you is in 2010, the Keystone 1 line, now we all heard about Keystone XL, the pipeline that Obama vetoed. TransCanada put Keystone went into service in 2010, so it's only been working about 6 years. In Missouri last year, they had a pipeline breach that was co-located with a high voltage transmission line. It corroded, stray voltage corroded brand new pipe and caused a leak there. So this is going to be up in our groundwater flow coming down towards private wells and our surface waters. There was a spill in South Dakota, I think it was in February maybe. A rancher found it on his land. By the way, most of the spills are found by the landowner, not by the companies, despite all their rhetoric about safety inspection devices going through their pipes and all that sort of stuff. He reported the spill. TransCanada said it was 187 gallons. It turned out to be 16,800 gallons. So they misreported the information, and it was only through locals reporting how many trucks were going off of this site, carrying the waste away, where they fessed up. Now, I talked about the groundwater. The bright red areas on this map are the soils that are most susceptible to contamination. So you can see where we're at. The Pinelands aquifer over by Park Rapids, where we grow a lot of potatoes, but that also extends over into here, and here's the whitefish chain in there. That means that not only are those soils very susceptible to contamination, but it probably also means that the groundwater flows at a quicker rate through those soils. So even a pinhole leak in a pipeline that's leaking a barrel a day, perhaps, you know, when you're pushing 770,000 barrels, are they really going to notice 1 or 2 barrel leak through a pinhole leak? That, by the way, was what was happening at that spill in South Dakota. This map here, most of these maps came off of the Department of Natural Resources site. The dark blue are prime wetlands. Hubbard County, not so much. That's the little light blue rectangle there at the corner of the route. But here, and especially over towards Big Sandy Lake by McGregor, critically important, and we all know how important wetlands are to our environment. This map here, every dark spot, star there, is a lake with wild rice. You look at where they want to put this route and you go, you got to be kidding me, really? You really want to go through the heart of Minnesota's wild rice country? To our Native American neighbors, this is spiritual genocide to them. That's the way they think of it. In my mind, because of, and you know, Jeff talked about it. He talked about Line 5, built in 1953. Line 3 was built, I think, before that, 51, I think. You know, and we didn't think about that kind of stuff in the early 50s. There are 6 pipelines in this existing northern corridor here. 4 of them are very, very old lines. The old Lakehead pipeline system that Enbridge bought out. Now they want to create a wholly new corridor, basically sandwiching our water resources, our best water resources, and Tom particularly pointed out tourist country, tourist dollars, what we love, our lake country, our cabin country, our lake homes. I think there's already too big of a footprint here. Jeff had a map of their system in it. I won't belabor this. Part of this whole process, and this started, you know, I got involved in this in the fall of 2013, late fall. We started Friends of the Headwaters in January of 2014. You know, back then the Department of Commerce allowed citizens to suggest alternative routes on this. And the way, I think the way they thought of it is, if we all lived in one valley and we were all organic farmers, we wouldn't want a pipeline going through our farms because we would lose our organic farm certification. So we would get together and say, can you go around? There's a group of folks in Minnesota in Carleton County that did just that. They're organic farmers. And actually the company did go around for them. They went around because there's a court case in the state of Minnesota where an organic farmer sued the Koch brothers plant down in Dakota County, and they won. And the Koch brothers had to move their pipeline. So the company said, oh, we're not going to do that. The red line right here, I'm on Google one night, and I see, I'm just doing gas pipelines, pipeline corridors. This starts in northern Alberta in the gas and oil country. It goes to a facility outside of Chicago, which, by the way, here's Enbridge, goes to. Straight line. I do a little bit more research. It turns out that Enbridge, they own 50% of this pipeline. Now, one of their executives told me a long time ago, when I asked them, where would you prefer to put pipe? He said, agricultural land. It's flat, it has a network of roads, the ground has already been worked, and it's the cheapest for us to do. And the roads are there if we do have an incident, or anomaly as they like to call them. So I propose an alternate route to bypass our headwaters country. These are the most valuable waters in the state. Tom showed you those couple maps. I've got them over here where, good quality lakes, lakes not under stress, waters down here under stress. This map shows the lakes and stream patterns. You might notice there's a little corridor right here, a plain north of the Minnesota River that's quite free of water crossings. I think Tom showed you that map. So rather than, when Friends of the Headwaters got started, we decided that we decided not to be an anti-pipeline group. We decided there must be a better way to do this. And obviously we're in favor of alternate energy sources and developing that, but until this country really starts to get committed towards that, we're still a fossil fuel-based economy. If the state of Minnesota has to be at risk for these hazardous liquid materials, let's put it in the safest place environmentally. That's that system alternative that Friends of the Headwaters proposed. So here's what's at risk. Tourism dollars, our drinking water, Itasca State Park, the second oldest state park in the United States after Niagara Falls. I think they would like us to consider a better way to do this, and obviously he would too. He doesn't really want 50 million gallons of oil going through our headwaters country. He needs your voice. That's why I started with our hands like this. I need you to put your hands together and join Friends of the Headwaters with this, so we're all supporting as much of our water resources as we possibly can. It's priceless. And obviously, we've got a lot of friends that we like to enjoy seeing on our lakes that need our voice too, because they can't speak up. They need us to speak for them. So Friends of the Headwaters is counting on you. They're counting on you. That's why we've got our hands out, as Tom said. FOH is a completely volunteer outfit. We are a 501c3. We have carried the burden, the legal burden of this fight completely by ourselves at this point. No other intervening groups have offered any dollars to assist with the legal fight here. We took it on our own. Matter of fact, We decided to bring a court case, and a number of the other intervening parties were rather upset that we did when we chose to do it. But we won, for now. And Tom made that remark at the beginning. There is an impression out there that because we won an EIS, a unanimous landmark decision from our appellate court, and because the Minnesota Supreme Court chose not to hear the case, that their verdict stood, that this is over. Well, we won an EIS. We are a long, long way from winning that EIS. The Department of Commerce in Enbridge is working very, very hard to undermine the court victory that we won to protect your water, my water, all of our water. We don't need pipelines through the heart of our headwaters country. Now, you can go to our website. There's a donate button on our website that works with PayPal. If you want to contribute to us, if you want to know more, my wife is obsessive about our Facebook page. I think she's married to that more than she is to me right now, but she's fantastic and she's done really, really great work. Tom summarized some of her stuff. There's a lot to learn. Also, there's infos over there if you just want to, if you want to mail a payment, if you want to work with your respective lake associations, if you want to work with WAPOA, there's a lot of different ways. But Friends of the Headwaters, most of that initial legal effort came out of a lot of really good folks over in Hubbard County, the bulk of it. Some of it came from here, some of it came from Sweden. I mean, we have people who love what we're doing all around the world. We need much, much more. There are going to be 2 legal battles in front of us, I think. One's going to be related to this recent settlement that Enbridge worked out with the Department of Justice. And I think the other is going to come as a result of a bad EIS. So where that EIS is right now, just so you all know, is in May, the Department of Commerce traveled the northern part of the state and took comments from the public for what's going to be included in the scoping decision on this environmental impact study. The deadline for comments was the end of May. Basically, we're in limbo right now because the Department of Commerce has not issued the scoping decision. What that will be is it'll basically set the parameters for how and what is going to be included in this environmental impact study. The lovely part of this is the company got to provide the environmental assessment worksheet for this. So the company talked about, the company's EAW looks like a glorified construction proposal project. Nowhere in the company's documents and nowhere within the Department of Commerce's own draft comments is this study. One of our environmental agency commissioners told me off the record that if this project were just about Line 3, this study would kill that project in this state. That's the reason why this is sort of dovetailed with Sandpiper. Thank you.
Just the suspicious character that I am, I've read the media coverage in the summary of the $177 million settlement, and I would like Richard to respond because I think he's going to agree, which is, Enbridge is going to now push Line 3 replacement next before Sandpiper and use this settlement, because the order of the settlement says you must replace Line 3 by the fall of 2017. It's entirely possible the state of Minnesota will not be finished with their EIS or these other things in that same time frame. So now, all of a sudden, the question will become, and I'm not the lawyer, Mr. Diesner is, and a few others, where does the jurisdiction of the federal government supersede any state regulation enforcing Line 3 to come through here. And now Enbridge is going to run Line 3 as its horse.
Initially, the EIS process had no federal involvement. It's completely a state EIS. By the way, the state has never conducted its own environmental impact study on an oil pipeline, on any kind of large diameter oil pipeline. There have been EISs done, like on Alberta Clipper, but because that crossed an international border, the feds were involved. Right now, it's strictly under state jurisdiction. And right now, it's under the jurisdiction of the Department of Commerce, supposedly with some help from the DNR and the PCA on this. We're not exactly sure at this point what this settlement means in terms of the Fed involvement. It may be a way to drag the EPA into this. If there is a way to drag the EPA into this, it'll make it a more complicated and a longer EIS process. The issue is in this settlement is that closing date of that Line 3 replacement has to be in the ground by December 2017. They would have to start digging right now, literally today, to get that pipeline in the ground. What's not in the settlement is they didn't mention the new route. And that's what's facetious about this whole Line 3 replacement project. They're not replacing the old Line 3. This is a wholly new pipeline corridor in the state of Minnesota from Clearbrook to Superior. And the intent is that the other old lines that are in that northern corridor I showed you in that one map are going to get rerouted down to this new corridor here. There's also one little term in that settlement that leaves Enbridge out to keep Line 3 operating after the new Line 3 is done. And they're going to call the new Line 3 Lakehead pipe.
Yeah, I had something.
Yeah, go.
Yeah, and this is the thing. This is why that last point I was making about, and this is why one thing to do is to talk to local officials, because that point about people believing things that Enbridge tells them, and I have lots of. The point I was making about the tendency of people to believe the things that Enbridge says, and I understand why it is, especially if you're a local official. The last thing you want is a fight with a great big pipeline company, and besides that, those pipeline companies know federal laws related to pipelines better than any local. Why should a local official know any of that stuff? However, and I saw this all throughout the process of the replacement of Line 6B, and I heard local official after local official parroting the words of Enbridge. There's nothing we can do. Pipelines are regulated at the federal level. And the point I want to make here, and this is directly related to this question of Line 3, that's not true. It's only partially true. Safety is what the feds regulate. You can't tell, a local municipality can't tell a pipeline operator the wall thickness of pipe or something like that. Routing and siting of pipelines is absolutely not regulated at the federal level. There is no preemption there. And so so what Enbridge is going to do is they're going to, but they know people don't know that. That's why they're going to use this. And they're going to say, DOJ says we have to replace it. It's a federal dictate. And local officials are understandably going to say, hey, there's nothing we can do. But there is something that they can do, and that is to get involved in this routing issue and to push that. So I think that's a crucial point. Just because they have to replace it doesn't mean they have to replace it there. There is no federal mandate to do that. Enbridge will pretend that there is.
Questions? We got a few minutes. Andy?
Yeah, I'll just add one quick thing too, just so that people know that federal consent decree is still a draft. You know, we have 30 days public comment period, which opened today, still has to be approved by a federal judge. And I know from the conversations I've had anyway with lawyers, they think there are parts that might not stand that level of review.
Right.
The Line 3. So I think it's very important that people weigh in on that, and I know that a lot of organizations, including most likely Friends of Headwaters, will be helping people to weigh in on that as we go along. So just to note, it's a public comment period. It's not a done deal yet.
Thanks, Andy. By the way, this is Andy Pearson. He's with Minnesota 350, one of the groups that's done a lot of hard work on all of this, and I'm glad you brought that up, because I was going to mention that the consent decree is just a draft. The deadline for public comments is August 24th, and we're going to post on our website both the email address and the address of the Department of Justice official to which any comment should go regarding the settlement. John?
Just to put some perspective on 50 million gallons a day, I think most of the people around here know we had a little rain in the last month. And the Corps of Engineers was letting out 1,500 cubic feet per second. That's roughly the same rate as 50 million gallons flows in a day.
Can you repeat that for the video?
Here.
Most people know that we had a little bit of rain. The Corps of Engineers is letting out 1,500 cubic feet per second, which is basically equivalent to 50 million gallons a day. You can go over and look at the dam and see how fast it's going out.
We have a retired DNR pipeline expert and ecologist who's done a lot of really great volunteer work for Friends of the Headwaters. And way back in the beginning of this process in 2014, he did a little calculation as to the amount of gallons of water, of oil going across our state versus the amount of water leaving our state. We're the river of oil. There's more oil going across this state now, courtesy primarily of Enbridge, than there is water leaving this state, and they want to add another 1.1 million barrels to that. So,
Next question.
Is
Steve?
all of the oil in the Enbridge system that's flowing through Minnesota the Canadian tar sands, or is some of it lighter grade oil?
so it's a mix. Matter of fact, the way they do it is Line 3 will not always be pushing heavy tar sands. In order they'll do a very light viscosity oil, and then they work up the grades to a heavier crude, and then finally tar sands, and then they start over again to do that. So yeah, the oil that's coming out of Alberta is mixed different grades of crude oil, but primarily most of those fields are on close to expiration. What's really left up there is the tar sands thing. And then, of course, Sandpiper is the Bakken of North Dakota.
Can I add something? So an interstate pipeline is a little bit like a freeway. It can't the pipeline company can't discriminate against what kind of product it ships. It has to ship what the shippers want. It has to transport what the shippers want, which actually is an interesting thing, because what it means is that there's no way for me to know at any given moment or any given day what's being pumped through that pipeline in my backyard. We know that a lot of it is tar sands, but not all of it is.
Jim?
There's an organization called the Mississippi Headwaters Board that was put together to try to protect the watershed in the northern part of our state. That's supposedly what their mission is. A number of counties are involved in that, and they're not opposed to what Enbridge is doing, and that troubles me. Why is it that they're not involved in what you're trying to do to make sure that the best decisions are made on this pipeline?
And let me just add to it another factoid. Furthermore, they've gone to Enbridge and applied for grants from Enbridge to support activity that the Headwaters Board is doing.
Enbridge has a annual grant program. I think it's either $1 million or $3 million. Don't quote me on the figure here because I can't recollect. I've got too many numbers in my head. Called their Eco Footprint Grants. And Bowser has gotten grants. Minnesota Land Trust has gotten grant money from Enbridge. You know, there are a number of different outfits, including, in many cases, your local county soil and water conservation boards, too. But to come back to your question.
Not Crow Wing County.
That's always been a mystery to us, Jim, as to why the Mississippi Headwaters Board will not get involved in this. Primarily, we think it's politics, And primarily, we think it's primarily the local politics. And then, obviously, money. You know, Enbridge puts that weight on them about what this means, what they think it means economically for us. And obviously, Tom has shown us otherwise. But
See, part of that is 8 counties, and it extends from Clearwater County, which is where Clearbrook is, and picks up Beltrami. I don't think Itasca's in there, but it picks up Aiken, Morrison, Cass, Crow Wing. A total of 8 counties. Itasca, I think, is one of them, now that I think about it.
yeah, Enbridge has got to work, they've got a facility in Bemidji,
Right.
you know, and
And Aiken County sees this as a big plus because
Yeah.
the representative from that area and the county commissioner on the Headwaters Board has repeated 100 times about the value in jobs for residents of Aiken County and the tax revenue that will help them reduce property taxes for everybody else.
You know, someone asked about what kind of actions can we do? Yeah, get on their case. Why aren't you involved in this? You know, where that pipeline corridor crosses by McGregor, if there's a benzene spill in the Mississippi River right there, that benzene will carry far enough downstream to actually impact the drinking water in Minneapolis and St. Paul. So, Chuck?
Chuck?
First of all, I'd like to thank Tom and WAPOA for putting on this program, because the number one thing that's most critical is that we all be educated. Secondly, I've worked with Richard and Friends of Headwaters since the beginning, and you can't imagine the work that he and the volunteers have put in. Without Richard's effort, you may recall, the certificate of need was granted to the pipeline before the Court of Appeals decision, and the PUC said, go ahead and study the route, but don't consider any of the alternative routes. So if the funding wasn't provided by Hubbard County and mainly the lake organizations to Friends of Headwaters, there would have been no appeal. And we would not have this meeting today. We'd be having a picnic out watching them dig the pipe in. The pipe would have been in the ground. My message to you is, treat this issue as a crisis, and treat it as you would treat trying to raise money for your church or your most favorite charity or whatever. Don't just go home and think about, well, should I write a check? Please get your lake associations organized, WAPOA, everybody else, send some letters out. There's a lot of people involved in this that aren't here today. And they need to get the message of what the crisis is and why we need the money. If we don't get the money, we may win in terms of the EIS and the decision. But guess what? Enbridge will appeal, and what are we gonna have to do? We're gonna pull their pin. And the last 4 years are wasted. So when you're doing this, the way we viewed it in Hubbard County was, how much money would you write a check for to protect your property? If you knew there was gonna be a spill, but you could write a check to prevent it, how much would you write the check? And that's what we all have to do. So please focus on funding Richard, and I think we owe him a great deal.
Just one other comment too, incidentally, on getting involved. Another forum, and I see her back there, Mary Ackerman. She and her husband Jim Rentz, who are up in the Hackensack area, have worked with the Leech Lake Area Foundation to start an organization called the Northern Waters Alliance, which is another way to connect all of our groups of lake associations and things in this immediate area. We're going to have a session up there on August 8th at 10 o'clock in the morning, isn't it? 9 o'clock in the morning. Yeah, Union Church in Hackensack.
Same kind of presentation, so if you have friends who couldn't hear this, we're gonna do it again
And part of this is really to get the message out to your respective organizations. It's going to be a whole lot easier to communicate with your neighbors than it's going to be for us. Okay? Because they know you, and they'll listen to your word in all of that. And I go back to the piece that I read on Jeff's blog, what the county commissioner in Michigan said. In effect, the county that Enbridge preferred to go through outworked the hell out of the neighboring counties, and that route went somewhere else. That's where it's got to happen here. I mean, there's other procedural matters. Chuck's comment about the alternatives and all those kinds of matters. You know, one of the statements that some of us have written about many times is Enbridge's application is to terminate this particular line in Superior, Wisconsin. State of Minnesota has decided that that's the scope of this particular project. Well, this oil isn't going to Superior, Wisconsin. It's on its way to the Gulf. It's on its way to the East Coast. Who the hell knows where? But it all comes to-
Enbridge was very, very smart in how they approached these new pipelines. What got TransCanada in a mess with their Keystone XL is they boasted they were going to build one of the longest pipelines, you know, intercontinental pipelines in North America. That became a real rallying point for a lot of different people. Well, Enbridge took a look at how that blew up in TransCanada's face, because that fight went on for 7 years there. Enbridge chose to do their pipeline expansion project in little pieces. So after Sandpiper and Line 3 are built, if they are built, Enbridge has a proposal in Wisconsin to build a new pipeline that's 42 inches in diameter, will move 1 million barrels per day through there. They've already completed a portion of this expansion project in Illinois. So basically, they are trying to expand their pipeline system out to the coast. And Jeff mentioned, he had a piece in there about the pipeline project up in Canada. Right now, that's dead. But these are never dead. They come back, you know. We can win a battle in the environmental war, but it's very infrequent we win the war. Jim?
Well, I was just going to ask Tom a question. You know, we've been working with 12 or 13 other lake associations in the area on aquatic invasive species issues, and have gotten a terrific amount of cooperation, examining county programs and responding to them and things like that. And I'm just wondering if that's another vehicle we should be considering to communicate some of this information so all of those lake associations can hear what we just heard today.
It is in part that same thing. The Northern Waters Alliance is another immediate area resource to do that. Incidentally, this particular presentation today is on a video, which will be picked up. Where's my technology guru? There he is. He says we can actually put it on our website, and you can go out there and watch it. Young lady in the back with the camera is your channel 22. 12, I'm sorry. Well, 22 for me. But it's Lakeland TV, and they've given us good coverage on things like this in the past. When are you going to play your material? Tonight at 10. Last couple of comments with respect to this, and we're getting close to the end. WAPOA is going to stay pretty active in this, I believe, for quite a while, because I think there's unanimous support on our board at the moment. I will tell you that we don't have a membership that's completely and universally in support of any activity we've taken on with respect to pipelines. They see this as opposing pipelines, and that we're an energy-dependent world and state and area, and consequently, we all use pipelines. I'll never forget a person I do business with showing up at Pine River for Line 3 hearing a year ago saying, "What's the problem with you guys? My husband and I have 8 cars. We need pipeline, so what's the problem, even if it's in your backyard?" And I thought, you know, the indictment of that sort of comment is crazy in speaking about the particular problem. This wasn't a needing oil question. This was a location question. And that's the routing part of this whole matter. So we're trying to explain to even our members that, you know what, we're not opposing bringing oil and getting oil into this country. The economics guru that I worked with on this particular matter early on is in the back in the blue shirt. I don't know what he knows about economics, but he made a profound statement to me one day here about 2 years ago or 3 years ago. He said, you know, if they don't build that line, which is the shortest distance from Clearbrook to Park Rapids to Superior, and they went through southern Minnesota, it's actually about 50% more miles. It seems to me that's more jobs and more tax revenue. Dave Fisher, the guru. And that's, you know, basically true. So I mean, this argument about local tax revenue and jobs and all this stuff, that's just bogus. It's not even a reasonable argument you know, as applies to this particular area. Any other questions? Steve?
It's my understanding that Minnesota Department of Natural Resources and the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency do not support the planned route,
They do not.
and yet the Public Utilities Commission keeps pushing forward, correct?
There's a governor who has put the commissioners under a little bit of control.
So can those two agencies be marshaled to help in the fight to have this rerouted?
Not right now, unless you're really good friends with Mark Dayton,
Yep.
because Dayton's got his thumb on the two commissioners pretty hard on
Even if
this.
we talk to our
Even,
local legislators?
huh?
Even if we talk to our local
Ab-
legislators, you don't think that would help?
Good luck.
Absolutely talk to your local legislators, absolutely
We saw
talk
what
to
happened
your,
to Scott Lucas.
but.
Gentleman
uh,
back here.
Yeah.
It seems to me when you read the papers that every meeting that they have, Enbridge organizes, it's supposedly about the route, but they turn it into pipelines are better than trains. Is there any effort to get the press to come out and kind of put this back in perspective and help us?
Richard probably can answer this question better, but the misnomer in all of that is the idea that pipelines will displace railroad and tanker cars. In other words, they can be used for other things. The research I saw was about 60% of today's production would still be on rails, because there are certain refineries that cannot accept oil, in fact, from pipelines.
Here's this situation, and it's, I'm not a fan of the word disingenuous, but I'll use it here. Enbridge has rail car loading facilities in North Dakota right now. And if you go on the Enbridge website and snoop around a little bit, you'll find a chart they have on that website, a graph, that indicates that they don't plan to lower rail traffic at all. They don't. So this is an argument that they're making. Now, on one hand, pipelines, there are more incidents with rail and truck, obviously because of the nature of how they travel, than there are with pipelines. But when there's a pipeline incident, there's a far greater volume of hazardous materials left in the environment than there is by rail or truck. The other thing that's happening is, with respect to the Bakken oil, is that has a very high flammable component. They are now starting to strip those components off the oil in North Dakota. So it's not exactly like we've got exploding rail cars. Now, you might have noticed there was a little release, I think it was yesterday or the day before, where the government of Canada is now prohibiting the kind of rail cars that caused that horrible accident a couple of years ago in Megantic, Quebec, where that whole little town blew up, 40 cars blew up, you know. There's some other really interesting research being done in Canada with respect to tar sands oil. And shipping that via rail is, someone figured out if we just heat this stuff up, it's like if you heat up peanut butter, it'll flow. So you pour it into a rail car, warm. Once it gets in the car and cools, it becomes a solid again. When it gets to its destination, you heat it up and you empty the rail car, you know. So there are ways around this, but the rail car issue is really a tough issue in here, which is why we're just saying if you're going to move this product via pipeline, let's at least put it somewhere that's a safe place to put it. Go ahead.
But my point is that they successfully get the press to say, gee, pipelines are safer than trains, when the purpose of the meeting was, we don't like the route. They always get off the route message in the press.
You need to talk to your media person in the back of the room about this, because that's how it's covered by them, you know. And like Tom said, when he addressed me a year ago about should I send this letter into the Star Tribune, or should you do it? I said, you do it, because they won't publish me, you know? And seriously, if anyone really needs to be crucified in this whole issue in this state, our media has done actually a very poor job of covering the environmental aspects of this story. It always becomes jobs, it always becomes taxes, and it always becomes a rail car. Those are off, slightly off, so.
Chuck?
Let me explain something about the DNR and the, excuse me, the Pollution Control Agency. From day one, the Department of Commerce has tried to exclude both those agencies from every aspect of the first set of proceedings. Now, if you ask them if the DNR and the MPCA are involved, or at the PCA or any of those agencies, they'll say yes. And technically, there's a document, it's called a Memorandum of Understanding. And it's a document between the Department of Commerce and the DNR and the MPCA that says they'll work cooperatively. But the key thing is, all decisions under that agreement, who's gonna do what, how much time is spent, how much money is spent, is all decided by the department.
I'll give you 2 examples here. Back in June of 2015, when the Public Utility Commission approved the Certificate of Need permit for the Sandpiper Pipeline, they gave the Department of Commerce the authority to go ahead with a route scoping document for Sandpiper, okay? The Department of Commerce hired a company called Cardno, an independent firm that does environmental analysis work. Cardno has done work with Enbridge. Cardno worked with Enbridge after the Kalamazoo spill. Now, we won our court case. Obviously, they made that decision for the Certificate of Need in June. We won our court case in September. Then it was ratified again by the Supreme Court in December. So in December, the Public Utility Commissioners had to basically vote to throw out the Certificate of Need permit and start over with this process. And one of them said we need to do a robust, comprehensive environmental impact study. What the Department of Commerce then did, the way it should be done is they should put out a bid for proposals to the independent companies to bid on this process. They renegotiated the contract with Cardno and brought that forward into the EIS. The other thing that they did is the Department of Commerce had already completed the scoping document for the certificate of route portion that the commissioners had ordered back in June. That should have been thrown out at the time of the court order, because the judges threw out the Certificate of Need and anything go. That scoping document has come forward into this EIS. This process is being framed by the Department of Commerce. I don't think, as a for instance, the only kind of field work that's going to be done on the suggested route alternatives is what Enbridge has already done on their preferred route. They are not going to do any field assessment work on any other alternate routes. They're just going to rely on data that's existing within the state agencies at this time. So that's why I said, and why I think we're going to be back in court, because I don't think this is going to be a good EIS.
One more question and we'll call it an afternoon. Jim?
The alternative route that you've suggested, and I forget the name, that's called SAO4 or whatever that is, through the southern part of the state. Is there a group there that has already formed opposing that alternative?
No,
No.
Thank you.
No.
no.
No, and
No.
just to add to Richard's comment, incidentally, I did a piece of research over the weekend. There is currently a hearing going on in Wisconsin to deal with a corridor and a need for pipeline from the Minnesota-Wisconsin border to Superior. 14 miles. In other words, that's going on at the moment. And the folks in Wisconsin where this would go, through Marshfield and on south, this pipe would go into an existing corridor that's got 4 lines, 6
Six.
lines.
6.
In it. So the
Yeah.
piece they got going on right now, so when they break this down, they chunk this thing. So this little chunk of 14 miles is going on in Wisconsin, and I think it's late in the hearing, isn't it? Do you know?
He's talking 2 different projects. The very tail end of the Sandpiper in line 3 will be from the Minnesota-Wisconsin border to Superior, about 14 miles. And I said, you know, they've got proposal to build a whole new pipeline. That's the one that's gonna run down through the center part of Wisconsin, and that landowners are getting organized there, kind of a la the way the folks in Nebraska did against the Keystone XL. It'd be my guess that if SA 404 was considered, you will start to see groups form in opposition to that, primarily over eminent domain. This is in their comments to the Department of Commerce on the scoping decision, Enbridge flatly says, we are a private company. We are not a public utility, and yet we demand to take your property if we want to go there. You know, and they get complicit state governments, and that's too bad.
Just to be clear, Jim, the alternate line that you're talking about is an existing corridor. That's not
Right.
plowing new ground.